The twin suns of Darren IV sank low behind the crimson dunes, turning the sand into a shimmering sea of molten light. Captain Elias Morrow trudged across the desert, his boots crunching against the brittle salt crust that covered the old battlefield. The war had ended 3 months ago, at least officially, but out here, ghosts still lingered. He was one of those ghosts. Once a decorated pilot for the United Earth Defense Fleet, Elias had been part of the invasion that ended the decade-long conflict with the Threxians, a race as beautiful as they were terrifying. The peace had come suddenly, after the Threxian homeworld was bombarded into surrender. Elias had thought he'd never see one again. Until that night. The storm came without warning, a roaring spiral of wind and sand. Elias had taken shelter in the remains of a downed dropship, curling against the metal hull when he heard it. Soft, almost human. A cry. He forced the hatch open and stumbled into the wind. The cry came again, high-pitched and desperate. Following it, he found a small figure huddled beneath a shard of wreckage, a child, thin and pale, her silvery skin coated with dust. She blinked up at him with wide, violet eyes. Elias froze. A Threxian child. She couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 by human standards. One of the enemy's young. Her lips quivered as she whispered something in a trembling voice, a word he didn't understand. She held out a small hand toward him. Elias hesitated only for a moment. Then he knelt, wrapped his jacket around her tiny body, and lifted her into his arms. "Easy there," he murmured. "You're safe now." The child pressed her face into his chest and shivered. And for the first time in years, Elias felt something he thought he'd buried forever: compassion. He carried her through the night, across the dunes, until he reached the edge of the human outpost. The guards aimed their rifles when they saw what he was carrying, but he didn't care. "She's a child," he said flatly. "She stays with me." Middle. The woman and her search. Months passed. Elias named her Lyra. She learned English quickly, mimicking his words and gestures with unnerving accuracy. She followed him everywhere, into the hangar bays, the refueling yards, the mess hall. When she laughed, the other soldiers softened. When she slept, Elias sat near her bunk, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest, wondering what he was doing. He knew he couldn't keep her hidden forever. The peace treaty with the Threxians forbade humans from harboring their young. But how could he send her away? Then, one day, the orbiting satellites caught something entering the atmosphere, fast, sleek, and unmistakably Threxian. A search vessel. It descended over the dunes like a shard of starlight. The soldiers at the outpost scrambled their defenses, but the ship didn't fire. Instead, it landed silently, its hull unfolding like a blooming flower. From within stepped a tall, slender woman clad in armor that glowed with living energy. Her skin shimmered like moonlight, her eyes a deep amethyst, the same as Lyra's. The moment she appeared, Lyra ran toward her. "Mother," the child cried in Threxian, the word clear and full of joy. The woman's composure shattered. She fell to her knees, arms wide open as Lyra collided with her. They embraced tightly, their foreheads pressed together in silent reunion. Elias watched from a distance, his throat tight. When the woman finally looked up, her gaze locked on him. There was something ancient and fierce in those eyes. She rose to her full height and approached, every movement regal and deliberate. "You are the human who took my child," she said in perfect English, her voice like music and thunder combined. Elias swallowed. "I found her alone. She would have died out there." Her expression flickered. Pain, gratitude, and something else. "You cared for her?" "I did what anyone should." Her gaze softened slightly, but her tone remained cautious. You risked your own life for a Threxian child. Why? Elias thought for a moment, then shrugged. Didn't feel right to leave her. Doesn't matter what species she is. The woman studied him for a long time before nodding. My name is Saren. I am Lyra's mother, and once I was a general of the Threxian fleet. Elias blinked. He'd heard of her, Saren of the Seven Moons, the strategist who nearly destroyed Earth's Mars defense grid. He'd fought against her forces without ever knowing her face. Now she stood before him, radiant and broken, holding her daughter's hand. I owe you a debt, she said, and our kind repay debts. But Elias shook his head. No debts. Just take care of her. He turned to leave, but Lyra's small voice stopped him. Daddy. The word froze everyone in place. Saren's expression faltered. Her lips parted slightly, her eyes widening. What did she call you? She whispered. Lyra turned to her mother and smiled innocently. He's my daddy. Saren stared at Elias, her hands trembling. The word hung in the air between them like a thunderclap. Middle. The word that changed everything. That night, the desert winds were silent. Saren stood outside the human outpost, her cloak trailing in the sand, staring up at the stars. Elias approached quietly. You should be resting. It's a long way back to your ship. She didn't answer at first. In my world, she said finally, there is no word like that. Father. Threxians do not raise their young. They are given to the collective, trained by the hierarchy. Parents are not known. Elias frowned. You don't have families? Not in the way humans do. Children are born from the birthing pools, our genetic perfection cultivated. They belong to the state, not to us. He looked at her with disbelief. So, you never hold them? Teach them? Love them? Her voice wavered. Love is considered weakness. Attachment breeds hesitation in war. Elias sighed, glancing back toward the outpost, where Lyra was sleeping peacefully inside his quarters. Maybe that's why you lost, he said softly. Saren's eyes flashed, but then dimmed. Perhaps. They stood in silence. Then she whispered, almost to herself, when she called you father, it felt as though my heart stopped. As if she spoke a word I was never meant to hear. Elias smiled faintly. Maybe that's what being human does. It teaches you the words that matter. Middle. Two worlds collide. The peace between their species was fragile. When word reached the Threxian High Council that Saren was seen in a human outpost, speaking with a human soldier, tensions reignited. A week later, an ultimatum arrived. Saren was to return to her homeworld immediately and relinquish her daughter to the collective. Saren refused. In retaliation, a Threxian strike team was dispatched to retrieve Lyra by force. Elias awoke one night to alarms blaring and the scent of smoke. The sky was ablaze with green plasma fire. The Threxians were attacking. He rushed outside, shouting orders, dragging Lyra to safety. Saren met him in the chaos, her armor shimmering as she ignited a blade of pure light. They will take her, she shouted over the explosions. Not while I'm breathing. Elias yelled back. Together, they fought side by side, human and Threxian, soldier and mother. Plasma bolts seared the sand around them as they shielded Lyra. Elias took a hit to the shoulder but kept firing. Saren cut down two of her own kind with tears in her eyes. When the last ship retreated, leaving only smoke and silence behind, the outpost was half destroyed. Saren knelt beside Elias, pressing a glowing hand to his wound. You are injured. I'll live, he groaned. She stared at him for a long moment. You would die for her. He met her gaze. Wouldn't you? Saren looked toward her daughter, sleeping in the wreckage, and for the first time, she whispered, yes. Ending. A mother's choice. Days later, reinforcements arrived from Earth Command. Elias knew what would come next. Lyra would be taken, studied, used as a political symbol. He couldn't let that happen. He found Saren in the hangar, repairing her ship. "You need to leave," he said quietly. "Take her and go. They'll come for her." Saren looked up sharply. "What about you?" He smiled sadly. "They'll come for me too. But if she's with you, she'll be safe." Saren stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. "You would stay behind? You would let her go?" Elias nodded. "It's what fathers do." Something in her broke. Slowly, she reached out, her fingers brushing against the scar on his cheek, a remnant from an old battle. "You humans, you carry pain like it is a sacred thing. You bleed for love, for family." He chuckled softly. "That's one way to put it." Tears welled in her eyes. "I will take her far from here. I will raise her as you would have wanted." He nodded once. "Then that's enough." Saren took a deep breath, then leaned forward. For a moment, she pressed her forehead against his, a gesture of Threxian honor and farewell. "Goodbye, father," she whispered. The word struck him like a blade and a blessing all at once. The next morning, the ship rose into the dawn, carrying Saren and Lyra away. Elias watched until it vanished into the clouds. He stood there for a long time, the wind tugging at his coat, the desert silent again. Months later, in a distant system, a Threxian child would ask her mother a question. "Will we ever see him again?" And Saren would smile softly, her eyes glistening with human-like tears. "Perhaps. For even across the stars, a father's heart can be felt." Ending line. And on Darren 4, beneath the twin suns, a scarred human looked up at the same stars, knowing that somewhere out there, a little girl still called him father.